Good morning. Yesterday I talked about the importance of self-awareness in recovery, and today we're going to look at some things from Staying Sober by Gorski and Miller and why self-awareness is so important in relapse prevention. Because a lot of the things that lead to relapse start out on a subconscious level, and if you're not aware of what's going on, you can be in bad shape before you really know what's happening. So I want to start with a paragraph that I thought was really important that goes back to something that I discussed recently, which was that sobriety and alcoholism, so addiction, it does not just have problematic symptoms when you are in your addiction. The sobriety-based symptoms of addiction are often just as difficult to cope with for a recovering addict. And so they put it like this: relapse prevention planning is based on the fact that the symptoms of addictive disease do not stop with abstinence. This is a disease that has two cutting edges. The first attacks while you are drinking or using. This is the obvious side of the disease. What is not so obvious is that the disease extends into abstinence and takes a vicious toll while you are attempting to recover. The sobriety-based side of the disease is as powerful and destructive as the alcohol and drug-based side, and you are even more helpless when it occurs because it is generally misunderstood and unrecognized. So they point this out to help people understand that it is the sobriety-based symptoms of addiction that lead to relapse. And it's very important to understand that there are sobriety-based symptoms of addiction. And when you get into recovery, when you are trying to stay sober, recognizing and understanding these symptoms can be a key component to a relapse prevention plan. So they talk about how important it is to plan for this kind of thing. So they go on and say, even if you have acknowledged your addiction and have stopped using, you are used to thinking in a way that supports what you want to believe. It's easier to say everything is all right now that I have quit drinking than it is to admit that you need to carefully follow a recovery program for the rest of your life. So one of the things that they point out a little bit later on is that a lot of times we don't fully see the symptoms of relapse as they come along, and these symptoms can be happening on a subconscious level. And as they put it, the symptoms of relapse usually develop on a subconscious level because they are out of your conscious awareness. The symptoms are allowed to build and intensify. You are not consciously aware of them until they are out of control. When your perceptions, judgment, and behavior are out of control, you will probably be unable to interrupt the relapse process before it results in an acute relapse episode. So this goes back to what I was saying the other day about the importance of self-awareness in recovery, being aware of what's going on, and being able to see the warning signs when they start happening, because a lot of times these warning signs are not on a conscious level. So what kind of warning signs are we talking about here? They start by saying that, one of the biggest warning signs is that recovery and recovery-based work stop being as important. So here's what they say about this. The warning signs will begin with minor changes in thinking and behavior. You will convince yourself that your addiction is no longer a priority issue. Other things become more important. You will then begin to use old behaviors instead of the new behaviors you have learned and made part of your recovery program. The old behaviors trigger old problems and the use of old denial patterns. These changes increase your discomfort and make a return to using not only possible, but desirable. But you will probably not be consciously aware of the changes that have taken place in your thinking and behavior. So the warning signs are something that start with minor things. Changes in behavior, getting out of the pattern that we've developed for ourselves in recovery, starting to prioritize things over recovery in a way that we didn't in our early recovery, and starting to think in general that we've got things under control and we don't need to work as much. That's the danger. That's when we get into a danger zone. Is when we think, you know what, I'm good. I've got this under control. I can stop working the way that I've been working. I've got a good friend in recovery who is very big on physical fitness, and he works every day to achieve his physical fitness goals because he knows that if he doesn't do that, he's not going to be able to maintain that fitness. That fitness is something that you don't get to a point where you're extremely physical fit and then you're done. Like you can just stop the rest of your life. He knows it's something he's got to do every day in order to maintain. Recovery's the same thing. We got to work at it every day in order to maintain it over our lifetimes. And that's why it's so important for people to realize that this is a lifetime game that we're playing. This is something that we've got to engage in every day for the rest of our lives in order to maintain sobriety. And sobriety is not just not drinking. Just going back to something that they say earlier in this chapter, sobriety from abstinence. So just want to give this definition that they give here. Sobriety is abstinence from addictive drugs plus abstinence from compulsive behaviors plus improvements in biopsychosocial health. Now, it's impossible to achieve everything in that formula without daily work for the rest of our lives. It's got to be some kind of work for the rest of our lives to do that. And for me, there's immense joy in that work because that work leads to growth, it leads to peace, it leads to serenity, all of which were very, very difficult for me to ever achieve when I was in active addiction. So it's work that's worth it. But when you start to have subtle shifts in the way that you think about your recovery, in the way that you prioritize it, when you start to feel like you don't need to do as much work, that's a good sign that you might be experiencing the very beginning of a turn back toward old behaviors, which could lead to a relapse. And so it's important to be able to recognize those signs, and then to have the willingness to do something about them when they come up. Hope you all have a great day, and I will see you back here tomorrow.